The sun rose slowly over the rolling hills, casting a warm, golden glow across the quiet countryside. It was the kind of morning that made a person feel glad to be alive, filled with the promise of new beginnings and fresh possibilities. For a man named Jed, a poor mountaineer who had spent most of his life barely keeping his family fed, life had recently taken a turn that no one could have ever predicted. One ordinary day, while he was out hunting, shooting at some food to put on the table, something entirely unexpected had happened. Up through the ground came a bumbling crude.
Oil, that is.
Black gold.
Texas tea.
The next thing anyone knew, old Jed was a millionaire, his life transformed in the blink of an eye. His well-meaning kinfolk had gathered around him, full of excitement, and told him that he had to move away from his humble home. California, they said, was the absolute place he ought to be. So, without looking back, they had loaded up the old truck with all their earthly belongings and moved away to Beverly Hills. It was a wonderland of swimming pools and movie stars, a far cry from the mountains they had always known, and they had quickly become known to everyone as the Beverly Hillbillies. Yet, despite the grand new surroundings, the heart of the family remained unchanged, rooted in the simple values of love, laughter, and looking out for one another. On this particular morning, the crisp air was filled with a sense of anticipation, for a wedding was supposed to take place. Jed was walking near the driveway when he spotted a familiar figure trying to slip away unnoticed. Shorty, a longtime friend with a habit of getting himself into peculiar situations, was moving quietly toward the edge of the property. Jed called out, asking where he was going. Shorty stopped in his tracks, turning around with a sheepish grin, and replied that he was just taking a walk. Jed looked at him knowingly, asking if he was running out on Mary and Alberta. Shorty immediately shook his head, insisting that he would do no such thing. He claimed that they were planning to drive to Las Vegas at daybreak to tighten the knot and finalize the marriage, but since it was only 2 o'clock in the morning, he was just passing the time. Jed smiled warmly, telling him that it was a ridiculous hour to be moving about. Shorty looked up at the sky, scratching his head, and remarked that it must have been the moon that came up, though he had honestly thought it was the sun. Jed gently suggested that he could get himself another 4 hours of sleep before the big day began. Shorty agreed that it was a good idea and promised to do just that, wishing Jed a good night as he turned back toward the house. Jed wished him a good night in return, hoping the restless groom would finally get some peace. However, it was not long before Jed noticed a shadow moving across the yard once again. He called out into the darkness, asking where Shorty was going this time. Shorty stopped, looking a bit caught in the act, and explained that he was merely practicing how he and Alberta would slip away in the early morning so as not to wake the family. Jed chuckled softly, reassuring his friend that he did not have to worry about such things, as the family was always up before daybreak anyway. Shorty feigned a look of immense relief, stating that the news truly relieved his mind and that he could finally sleep. They exchanged good nights once more, but the peace was short-lived. Within what felt like mere minutes, Jed spotted the elusive groom making another attempt to depart. He asked if Shorty ever slept, to which Shorty replied that he was just about to ask Jed the very same thing. When pressed about his current activities, Shorty claimed he had decided it would be incredibly romantic if he and Alberta could be entirely alone for their journey. Jed, with his characteristic dry wit, asked if it would not be even more romantic if Shorty actually took Alberta along with him. Shorty paused, a look of sudden realization dawning on his face, and exclaimed that he knew he had forgotten something important. With a chuckle, he wished Jed a final good night and headed back inside. When the true morning finally arrived, the household was bustling with energy. Mayor Heller was already present, offering a cheerful morning greeting to Alberta and wishing her a happy wedding day. Alberta blushed, thanking the mayor kindly for his sweet words. She looked around anxiously, wondering if the groom was awake yet. Mayor Heller admitted he did not know, as he did not think it was proper for him to enter the young man's room unchaperoned. Shad, standing nearby, volunteered to check on him, promising Alberta that he would wake him very gently. Alberta thanked him, turning to comment on what a shame it was that Mayor Heller was already married, noting that otherwise, they could all go together and make it a double wedding. Shad smiled modestly, saying he was far too old to think of getting married. Alberta, in her usual blunt yet cheerful manner, agreed that he was probably right. Just then, Ellie Mae entered the room, wishing everyone a bright morning. She was accompanied by a small animal, which immediately caught the attention of the others. Alberta greeted her warmly, while Shad and the mayor looked on. Granny, who had been busy in the kitchen, looked up and immediately voiced her disapproval, stating that she did not like varmints in her kitchen and telling Ellie Mae to take it outside. Ellie Mae defended her companion, stating that Bessie was not a varmint, but rather her dear friend. Granny remained firm, insisting that she take her friend outside regardless. Ellie Mae complied, gently kissing the animal and calling it a dear, sweet thing before heading out the door. Alberta watched them go, commenting on what a shame it was that Ellie Mae had to lavish so much of her affection on animals because she had no man and no prospects, seemingly doomed to be an old maid. Alberta contrasted this with her own situation, noting with pride that she was getting married for the second time at her age. Granny, always sharp and quick-witted, asked exactly what age that might be. Alberta leaned in, whispering that between them, she would never see 40 again. Granny looked her up and down, asking dryly if she had caught a glimpse of 50 as she passed him by. Meanwhile, upstairs in the guest room, Shad was attempting to fulfill his promise. He shook the sleeping groom, urging Shorty to wake up. When there was no response, he called his name again. Jed walked into the room, asking what the trouble was. Shad explained that he simply could not wake the bridegroom. Jed looked down at the sleeping man, noting that from the look of the peaceful smile on his face, he must be having one awful happy dream. Shad speculated that he was probably dreaming about the bachelor party from the previous night, remarking that one could hardly blame him since it had been a spectacular celebration. They tried shaking him again, calling him a chic and a favorite among the girls, until Shorty finally began to stir. Shorty blinked against the morning light, looking utterly bewildered. He asked where he was and what day it was. Jed informed him clearly that this was the day he was set to marry Alberta Bradshaw, telling him to get up and get ready. Shorty groaned, pleading with them to have a heart, and confessed that he simply could not marry Alberta. When asked why not, Shorty pointed out that because he had missed the bachelor party the previous night, he had missed seeing all the pretty girls. Jed corrected him firmly, saying that those days were all over and done with now. Shorty suggested that it did not have to be that way, proposing that they could just have another bachelor party that very night. Jed asked who the party would be for, and Shorty pointed at Shad, noting that he was single. Shorty suggested they have the party tonight, and then he could get married tomorrow instead. Shad quickly declined, asking who he would even marry, to which Shorty happily replied that he was glad Shad had asked. Jed cut the discussion short, stating they did not need an answer, as this was the wedding day and the bride-to-be was waiting. Shorty reluctantly swung his legs out of bed, complaining loudly that the floor was freezing cold. Jed encouraged him to look on the bright side, reminding him that by tonight he would be on his honeymoon. Shad chimed in, adding that he would be able to snuggle up nice and cozy with Alberta Bradshaw. The thought seemed to provide Shorty with a sudden burst of motivation, and he hurried off toward the bathroom. A short while later, Alberta was waiting downstairs, growing increasingly impatient. She asked where Shorty was, and Jed informed her that he was still in the bathroom. Jed walked over to the door, calling out to ask what he was doing and reminding him that Alberta was waiting. Shorty called back through the door, shouting that he was shaving. Jed pointed out that he had been shaving for an hour already. Shorty complained that he had a dull razor, but Jed joked that it could not be that dull, otherwise he would not even be able to cut his ribs. Jed demanded that Shorty unlock the door and come out immediately. Shorty promised he would be out in a minute. While they waited, Shad approached Jed with a look of concern, mentioning that he had just thought of something. He pointed out that the bathroom was next to his room and there was a great big tree right outside the window. He asked if Jed was at all afraid that Shorty might climb out the window and shimmy down the tree to escape. Jed smiled calmly, shaking his head and saying he was not worried about that at all. Just then, Alberta walked down the hallway, asking if she could come in and wondering where her darling little fiancé was. Jed told her he was showering, while Shad simultaneously said he was shaving. Alberta looked between them, confused by the contradiction, and asked which one it was. Jed quickly recovered, explaining that Shorty was so anxious to see her that he was actually shaving and showering at the very same time. Alberta smiled, walking up to the door and calling out to her blushing bridegroom, asking how soon they could leave to get married. Shorty shouted back, suggesting they leave next Saturday at 8. Alberta gasped, reminding him that Wednesday was their wedding day. Shorty quickly amended his statement, saying he would see her next Wednesday instead. Alberta looked worried, but Jed assured her that Shorty was simply so thrilled and excited that he did not know what he was saying. Shad agreed, adding that the thought of marrying her had left him completely paralyzed. Alberta questioned the word, and Jed clarified that he meant paralyzed with joy. Alberta beamed, thinking it was incredibly sweet. Jed suggested she leave Shorty to them, and Shad promised they would have the bridegroom ready in no time at all. Alberta thanked them warmly and stepped away. Once she was out of earshot, Jed knocked on the door again, asking Shorty what he was doing now. Shorty replied that he was about to have himself a drink, having found a bottle of alcohol. Jed warned him sternly not to drink it, explaining that it was rubbing alcohol and highly poisonous. Shad agreed, telling him not to go near it. Shorty admitted through the door that he was merely hoping to get up enough nerve to face the day. Jed told him to forget it, reminding him that drinking that stuff would kill him, and urged him to come out and marry Alberta. Meanwhile, in a fancy corporate office downtown, a completely different kind of drama was unfolding. A wealthy bank president, often referred to as the chief, was sitting at his large desk when his assistant entered. The assistant mentioned Miss Bell, the secretary whom the chief had recently deprived of a bonus. The chief grew irritated, stating that if he heard one more word about that lousy bonus, he would fire the assistant, Miss Bell, and the entire secretarial pool. The assistant quickly clarified that it was nothing like that, explaining that Miss Bell's little brother, Cookie, would simply like to meet him. The chief relaxed slightly, telling him to send the little fellow in and promising to give him a free piggy bank. However, when the little brother walked in, he turned out to be a massive, imposing professional football player, followed closely by an even larger man who was introduced as her big brother. The chief swallowed hard, looking up at the two giants, and asked what he could do for them. The brothers stated they understood there had been a slave auction held at the bank the previous night. The chief stammered, claiming it was just a fun, themed auction, though the brothers noted it did not look like much fun for the participants. They pointed at a man dressed in a costume, asking who he was. The chief explained he was a sheik who had participated in the event and quickly called for his associate, Miss Hathaway, to explain the situation. Miss Hathaway, playing along with the costume theme, joked that she knew nothing because she was just a camel driver. The chief glared at her, thanking her sarcastically. The chief turned back to the large men, explaining that it was truly just a party where 3 secretaries had volunteered to be make-believe slaves for a charity event. He assured them it was all good, clean fun, and asked Miss Hathaway to bring the 3 secretaries in. When they entered, the chief tried to make small talk with the brothers, asking what they did for a living. One of them replied that he played professional football, and the chief smiled nervously, stating that football was his absolute favorite sport, though he admitted he was not quite big enough to play it himself. Miss Hathaway announced the arrival of the secretaries, jokingly referring to the chief as the master. The chief begged her to stop joking and asked the gentlemen what they wished to discuss. They stated they were there regarding their sister being involved in the auction, and specifically about the $100 bonus that was owed to her. The chief agreed immediately to settle the matter, but looking at the 3 women, he asked which one was their sister. The brothers looked at him incredulously, asking if he was kidding. The chief claimed he was completely colorblind to excuse his confusion. He quickly instructed Miss Hathaway to write out a personal check to the young lady for $100, making sure she took it from the red folder rather than the green one. As the brothers accepted the check and prepared to leave, the chief tried to salvage his dignity, remarking to the football players that, as they well knew, a person cannot win them all. Back at the Mountaineer home, the preparations for the honeymoon trip were nearly complete. Shad was outside, working on the vehicle, when Jed walked up. Shad cursed his past choice of profession, joking that he should have been a blacksmith instead of dealing with old cars. He proudly showed Jed how he and Ellie Mae had decorated the honeymoon car, complete with signs and ribbons. The main sign boldly read Las Vegas or Bust. Jed looked it over, saying it looked really nice, but expressed hope that Shorty would not think the sign gave him a choice in the matter, joking that Shorty would definitely choose Bust if he could. Shad laughed and showed Jed a sign he had placed on the back, but Jed noted that it might be jumping the gun a bit since the couple would not actually be married until they reached Las Vegas. Shad demonstrated how the sign could be folded down out of sight during the drive there. Ellie Mae walked out, admiring the decorations and thanking Shad for his hard work. Alberta appeared on the porch, asking if they were ready to go. Jed replied that they were just waiting on Shorty. He volunteered to go looking on him, noting that the last time he had checked, Shorty was still safely tied up to keep him from running. Inside the room, Shorty was pleading with Chad to have a heart and let him loose. Chad refused, stating that Shorty was not getting loose until he was absolutely ready to drive to Las Vegas and marry Alberta. Shorty tried to bargain, offering Chad his favorite old mule that Chad had always admired. Chad told him to stop wasting his breath, revealing that he had already turned down a $20 cash offer. Shorty then offered to throw Alberta into the deal as well. Chad asked what he would even do with her, and Shorty admitted he did not know, but told Chad to let him know if he thought of anything. Jed walked into the room, announcing that the time had finally come for them to leave. He urged Shorty to cheer up, asking if he wanted to see what the family had done to his car. Shorty looked panicked, asking if they had burned it or wrecked it. He then paused and asked if Alberta had been inside it when it happened. Jed assured him that the car was in perfect shape, and so was Alberta. Shorty muttered that he could believe that about the car, but it had never been true of Alberta. Jed asked him frankly why he had asked her to come all this way to marry him if he felt that way. Shorty explained that he had not seen a woman in 4 weeks while he was hiding out in Granny's room cellar, but once he saw all the pretty girls at the party, he had completely changed his mind. Jed told him to forget about those other girls, insisting that Alberta had everything they had. Shorty joked that he wondered where she kept it all. Jed told him to stop that kind of talk, reminding him that he was getting a fine, hard-working woman. Chad agreed, noting that they were made for one another and reminding Shorty that Alberta now owned the Silver Dollar City Hotel, meaning they could run it together as a dandy team and be the happiest two birds in the nest. Shorty seemed to soften at the idea, admitting that he was getting tired of running the hotel all by himself, doing all the cooking and cleaning. Jed assured him that Alberta would handle all of that. Alberta knocked and entered the room, asking if her bridegroom was ready. Shorty stood up, announcing that he was ready, though Jed noted he was still just a mite nervous. Alberta smiled sweetly, telling him he must not be nervous because they were going to be so happy together. Shorty expressed his hope that she was right. Alberta stepped closer, offering him a warm kiss as a small sample of the happiness in store for him, promising there would be much more where that came from later tonight. Shorty grinned, turning to the guys and stating that the kiss had certainly clinched it, asking them to fire him up again for the trip. Back at the bank, the chief was sitting in his office, looking surprisingly relaxed. Miss Hathaway commented on how calm and collected he seemed after his little scare with the football players. The chief took offense, asking if he had actually looked scared. Miss Hathaway replied that he had looked absolutely terrified. The chief defended himself, claiming he simply did not want to start a fight in front of a woman, but boasted about what he had told those men after Miss Hathaway left the room. When she asked what he had said, the chief admitted he told them the entire situation was her fault. Miss Hathaway looked unamused, thanking him sarcastically. She then handed him the bills from the previous night's party. The chief gasped at the total, wondering how he was going to explain expenses like oriental tapestries, slave girl costumes, and gold chains to the board of directors. Miss Hathaway suggested he tell them they were photographing an advertisement for the bank. The chief thought about it, realizing it was a natural fit. The ad could feature beautiful slave girls in chains with a motto telling people not to be a slave to debt, but rather to save their money at the Commerce Bank. He praised the idea as fabulous and decided they should reshoot the photo immediately using just Miss Bell. He instructed Miss Hathaway to get her back into the costume right away, promising to ask the board for a raise for Miss Hathaway based on the brilliant ad idea. Miss Hathaway smiled, saying that was wonderful, though the chief complained that a raise would probably just put him into a higher tax bracket anyway. Back at the house, Jed was helping Alberta load her bags into the car, telling her she would be on her way to Las Vegas in just 2 minutes. Alberta admitted she had never been to Las Vegas before and mentioned that Granny had told her there was a lot of gambling there. Jed confirmed that he had heard the same thing. Alberta expressed her deep hope that Shorty would not be tempted, stating that if there was one thing she absolutely could not tolerate, it was gambling. She noted that for some folks, it was a regular sickness. Jed agreed, and Alberta shared a story about her own family, where a happy marriage had been completely broken up because of it. She explained that her Aunt Bertha had married a man who seemed to be the very picture of propriety, sober, hardworking, and church-going. Together, they had saved a small fortune, but in a single poker game, they were completely wiped out. Jed called it a terrible shame, and Alberta agreed, noting that her aunt had been lucky in love but stuck with a lousy poker player. Shorty walked out to the car, shouting that he could not wait to get to Las Vegas. Jed and Chad volunteered to go crank up the car for him. Once they walked away, Shorty turned to Alberta, noting they were finally all alone, and asked for another one of her kisses, calling it a steamer. Alberta happily complied, giving him a big kiss. As they pulled apart, Shorty accidentally dropped a deck of cards from his pocket onto the ground. Alberta looked down in shock, asking if those were poker cards and demanding to know if he played. Shorty proudly admitted that he played poker, blackjack, gin rummy, pinochle, and any game that was played for money. Alberta begged him not to play cards, so Shorty playfully suggested they shoot craps instead, rolling some imaginary dice and shouting out his points, asking her to cover the bet. Alberta gasped, asking what had gotten into him. Shorty claimed that the old gambling fever had suddenly taken hold of him. Alberta, horrified to learn he was a gambler, declared that the wedding was off, stating she did not dare go to Las Vegas with an inveterate gambler. She called for Jed to come and talk to him, hoping they could cure him of this sudden attack of gambling fever. Shorty just laughed, rolling his imaginary dice again, calling for good luck, and asking for someone to place a bet against him. Jed and Chad watched him, with Jed noting that Shorty was a hard rascal to reel in, and Chad agreeing that it looked like he had managed to avoid the trap once again.